so I didn't. I forgot to get one myself. By the way, I know with everything going on, but we have about 500 or 600 books to put together. About 500 of them are going to be glue binds. So, I mean, while Stacy's gone, you need something to keep you occupied. Oh, do what, Casey? Go fit. All right, chapter 18, verses 12 through 19. And there's really one central theme that pretty much runs through this. Babylon is fallen. That's the theme of the chapter. But even beyond that, we saw last week some of the things that were going on. We saw that the only possible city that can fit every one of these criteria is spiritual Babylon. Physical Babylon was destroyed there shortly before before the time of Christ. Physical Babylon was destroyed. But this is a spiritual Babylon, and the only thing that fits everything that we've looked at is that this would be the city of Rome, the home of the world dominance of idolatry, the home of world dominance of all kinds of things that are antichrist. So we've already looked at much of that. In verse 12, we get a list of some of the things that this harlot church was involved in. And so in verse 12, the merchandise, gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, fine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, all manner of vessels of most precious wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. This is the merchandise that this harlot church was involved in. Everything from precious metals to priceless jewels to the finest of clothes, the most beautiful, expensive furniture, the most reliable materials. This is what this church was not only itself getting rich, but it was making everyone else rich as merchandisers of all of this stuff. Notice it also said in verse 12, and all manner of vessels. So that would include not only the material, but the vessels that are made of that material. What one church in all the world is involved in more merchandise than any other church in the world? You need a second guess. Catholic Church. It's the only one. In fact, and I heard this repeatedly when I was younger. At one time, this was several popes back, but at one time the Pope owned Yankee Stadium. I don't know how much Yankee Stadium is worth, but it's more money than I got. How about you? Well, I mean, this would have been years ago, but you know, you look at the everything the Catholic Church is involved in. Look how many people look to the Catholic Church to merchandise their stuff. And growing up, I never heard of such a thing until several years ago. I was over in Cincinnati for some reason, and I drove down this street, and it had this huge store of everything Catholic. You know, you want it, Catholic, they've got it. Everything from little, what do we call those, praying beads, rosary. They got rosaries, all kinds of idols that you can buy, Catholic clothes, Catholic everything. They're making a killing. Now, in verse 13, we went ahead and read it. It includes all of the spices and perfumes that are known. It includes wine, which would include all alcoholic beverages. And every time I read that or think about that, I think about some of the old TV movies with the old gangsters. You know, back in the old days when the gangsters would meet with the bishop and the priest and the archbishop and, you know, slip them a little money, and the bishop would turn his face or head in all of their shenanigans. But these are the things that men turn to in droves during these times of trouble. These men got rich by buying and selling oil. Now, in the Old Testament, there's no question, in the Old Testament, oil almost always referred to olive oil or something similar, which was used, of course, in the tabernacle, burning the oil and the lamps. But I wondered, and I read this, and I thought, is it possible? Is it possible that John was looking forward in time and saw the great oil cartels? I'm not saying he did or didn't, but they certainly have made themselves rich with oils, and there's not that much money in olive oil today. I'm not saying it is, but certainly there have been billions of dollars made in oil. By the way, I love reading, and I was reading the other day that right now America is importing almost 1 million barrels of oil per day from Russia. Now, last I heard, oil was up to $100 a barrel. So 1 million barrels per day. Anybody want to guess Russia's making money off of that? And that's just what we get from Russia. That's not counting all of the other places. Certainly there is a fortune to be made. Fine flour and wheat could stand for agricultural products, which are, you know, now the market of the world. The animals in their byproducts would produce food and clothes, valuable products on the world market. Horses are not only used for burden, but horses are not only beasts of burden, but they were means of transportation back in John's day. They didn't have, you know, these big vans. They didn't have these big box trucks. They had horses and camels that did their carrying for them. Today we would call them cars, tractor trailers, airplanes, trains. But they were means of transportation. The chariots were often used in fighting. And so could it be that John was seeing the modern day fighting equipment, as well as chariots were used for more than fighting? We find out in particularly some of the Old Testament stories where they would take a chariot and fill it full of merchandise and use it to haul. So is it possible that maybe the chariots were used for hauling? And certainly we would see that today. I'm not nostalgic, and I don't want to go back to the good old days. But one thing that I think, and I think this is destroying us individually, collectively, it's destroying families, churches, communities. Everybody's in such a big hurry anymore. You know, and I'm throwing this in. And again, I'm not nostalgic, but Sundays would go to church. Dad would invite 4 or 5 families over. After he invited them, it's like, Betty, do you have anything to feed all these folks? Yeah, we got some bologna, leftover mashed potatoes, And if we didn't have people over, after we ate, we'd all get in the car and just start driving, and looking at the scenery, and we'd be over, we're down in Verona, and it's like, you know what? Let's stop by and visit. You weren't doing anything. You were just sitting there. We would go in, visit for an hour or two. Nowadays, we're all in such a hustle bustle. If a red light stops us going somewhere, we're going to be late. Is it possible that John was seeing the great automobile, truck, van thing? Now, slavery, he said that they made their money in slaves. Slavery is technically illegal in the USA, although it's still a very, very big, lucrative thing, even in the U.S. But in some parts of the world, slavery is a multi-million, billion-dollar industry. Young girls are often snuck in, and this is, one of the things that people don't realize about the border is they slip young people in, young girls especially, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, sell them out in the slave market as nothing, they get a pimp. The pimp sells them to the slave market to lustful men. So the idea of slavery is still very much a worldwide thing. Not as much in the U.S., at least it doesn't make the headline news, but slavery is still big business, especially in the young female, now even young males, are prostituted out, both men and women. Apparently it's going to get even bigger when the Holy Spirit is taken out, true Christians are taken out. There's no one to rebuttal this or to stand up against it. And so forced prostitution not only destroys the body, but it also destroys the very soul of the slaves. But then notice also, and I didn't see this until I read it several times, and souls of men. They make money off of the souls of men. Could this be? Well, let me back up. Your spouse dies. Well, the Catholics say they go to purgatory. How long do they stay in purgatory? Depends on how much money you're willing to pay the priest and the church to get out of purgatory. They're making a fortune. Well, you want your spouse out of purgatory? It's going to cost you. Now, for you, we'll let you off at $5,000. For you, it's going to be $25,000. You've got more money than he does, and I'm making this up. And they're making a fortune off of the souls of men for something that doesn't even exist. Verse 14, greed and covetousness have long been part of the Babylonian Empire. Notice, the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and godly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. Everything you built your life around, your lavish lifestyle, your expensive furniture, your gourmet Chardonnays, your fine silk clothing, all of everything you put stock in is gone. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Not only has everything been destroyed, but there's no hope of ever getting it back again. I had a first cousin, died a couple of years ago. And we used to run around a lot in our high school, college years. We ran around a lot together. He and I were opposites in almost every respect. He married, I married. He had children. We didn't for a long time, but if he wanted something, he's not going to buy it, he's going to make it. He wanted a house for his wife and children. So he bought a little piece of land, actually a pretty good sized piece of land, and bought materials, work sites. Hey, you're going to throw away those 2x4s? I'll take them. You're going to throw away that pipe? I'll take it. Little by little, he built this house. I never got to see it, but apparently it was a pretty big house. Did his own plumbing, his own electric, his own HVAC, did everything himself. And then one day it burned to the ground. Everything, nothing saved. You know what he did? He said, oh, well, I built the first one, I'll build me another one. And he started from scratch all over again. That house meant absolutely nothing to him. It was just a place to live, place to sleep. And when it burned down, it's like, well, Gene, can I sleep with you for a while? You got a couple extra bedrooms. It meant nothing to him. You could give him a $50,000 watch, and he would wear it in the mud pen, chasing pigs. He would wear it. Money didn't mean a thing to him, literally. But these people are so absorbed with what they own, with what they have, with their material possessions, that when suddenly everything's gone, all they can do is weep and weep and wail. They were made extremely rich by the merchandise of this harlot church. And all they can think about is the material lost. They lived in great wealth and luxury and neglected the most important thing in the world, which is their soul. They put their trust in the man of sin. Only like Adam and Eve and countless millions other, find out Satan lied. I know people who claim to be saved, members of Baptist churches, that worry more about the stock market than they do the welfare of their own church. They worry more about the inflation than they do about their own children dying and going to hell. They worry more about, $1,000 missing in their checking account than they do the fact that if they're saved, they're cold and indifferent. That puts you in the same category as these men. In verse 16, verse 15, the merchants of these things which would make rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. How is this going to affect me? I'm watching my beloved city. I'm watching my wealth go up. I'm going to keep my distance so that it doesn't affect me anymore. They stood afar off, and they were weeping and wailing, not for sin, not for the people that had died in God's judgment, but for their financial loss. Verse 16, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. No remorse for sin. There's no sorrow that they sold himself to the man of sin only to be betrayed. All they care about is their wealth and their down market or their down stocks. And I say this, and I'm afraid that many of our Baptist churches are more concerned about material things than they are about heavenly things. And again, I've said it a bazillion times. If God gives you wealth, thank Him, appreciate it, and then do as Paul said over and over. Don't build your life on it. Use it certainly to provide. Proverbs said a righteous man provideth for his children and his grandchildren. So there is some premise there to take care of ourselves. But if God has blessed you with wealth, understand it's only temporary. In verse 16, I just read verse 16. Verse 17, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. Now the question comes up, is this a literal 1 hour? Is this a 60-minute hour? Or is this hour in a figurative sense? One preacher says, I'm not going to preach over an hour. You might as well take your no-dos. Or, well, sometime around the 9th hour. Hour can be literal or it can be figurative. Either way, this destruction came swiftly. It's one reason many have speculated it would be some kind of a nuclear attack. I don't know. I'm not a prophet in that sense. I don't see the future. But even though the destruction had been swift, they still refused to recognize God's hand in their destruction. They still refuse to cry out to God for mercy. All they can think about is their luxuries that they're giving up. Notice the news of the downfall spreads throughout. Every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off. These would be, the word spreads. How long does it take to get news from Ukraine to Cincinnati? Yeah, very quick. Now, there is a couple second delay, but I was watching the news the other night, very rare, and they were showing live scenes in Ukraine, live, and there was about a 2 or 3 second delay, and I was watching the live scene. So how fast do you think it would take, how long do you think it would take for news of the utter, total destruction of Rome to spread around the globe? Not long at all. In verse 18, they are still only concerned with their finances. Verse 19, they cast dust on their head, demonstrating tremendous signs of grief. Whenever you were really, really tore up, grieving great loss, they would rip their garments, the Jews would, and pour dust and ashes on their head to showing the severity of their loss. As the nations of the earth were made rich all that had ships in the sea, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Even under the worst of circumstances, people are still more concerned with their earthly possessions. And I try, not every day, but almost every day, to pray and ask God, keep me focused. Keep me focused. Don't let me get sidetracked by all of these other things that can come along. Because when I die, all these other side things won't mount to a hill of beans. Father, we come again.